Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live animal program meet and greet this morning. We'll be looking at some really fun critters that inspire us here at the museum. We're so excited to have you this morning. We'll be a few more moments so that other folks joining from different places can go ahead and join into our webinar, but we're so excited to have you here with us. We'll have this program visible to view in closed captions in English and Spanish. So you can click on the external link that will drop into the chat for you all. For guests watching on YouTube, the link to closed captions in English and Spanish is in the video description below. My name is Julie, and I'm an educator here at the Natural History Museum. And you might be surprised that we have live animals here at the Natural History Museum, but we do have over 100 different species of living animals that are living in places like our Nature Lab, Bugtopia, the Discovery Center, and many that live behind the scenes as well, which you might actually get to see this morning. All righty. We also have a full education team who is working behind the scenes with us today. So just wanted to call them out. Thank you so much for assisting us this morning. We'll be together for about 45 minutes and we'll learn more from our special guest today. After our special guest is done sharing, we'll have some time to answer some of your questions about the presentation and their work. All right, so this might be a different format than you're used to seeing in a Zoom meeting. So you'll be able to hear and see us, but we won't be able to hear and see you folks. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all of the schools joining us this morning that you can see on the school. So a bunch of different schools from across the greater Los Angeles area and beyond, even some homeschool students in there. Thank you so much for being here. Alrighty, so since we can't see any of you folks, you can only see us right now. We're going to use the chat function a little bit later on for you folks to ask questions. During the presentation, if you're watching this on Zoom, you can click the chat box to type in your question. Or if you're with your entire class in the classroom and only your teacher is viewing from the computer, then you can ask your teacher, your adult, to type your question into the chat and just let us know, hey, this student from this school has this question, and we'll try to get to it during the presentation. The chat box is closed right now, but it will be open during Lisa's presentation and during the question and answer. We ask that all of our friends joining us today only put questions or comments that are related to the presentation in the chat. This helps us make sure that we can get through as many questions as possible to be respectful of our helpers. We also ask that participants are communicating respectfully and using appropriate language in the chat. For folks that are not following this code of conduct, we may remove you from the program. So thanks for being mindful. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and go back one. But Lisa, I think we're ready for you this morning. I'll let Lisa jump into things. But we have our very special guest here who is one of our Living Collection staff member, and I'll let her chat a little bit more about herself and what we're chatting about this morning.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you to all the students that are watching right now. Good morning, and we're really excited to share some of our live bugs that live here at the Natural History Museum. Most of the time when I tell people that I work at the Natural History Museum, they say to me, oh, that's the museum with the dinosaur bones, which is true. We do have a lot of dinosaurs, but we also have things that are living, including lots of really small and some not so small bugs that are here in the museum. So Julie mentioned this briefly, but I just want to show a couple of pictures of some of the places where you could visit the live bugs. We have a butterfly pavilion that's open in the spring and summer. And then in the fall, we turn that space into a spider pavilion. So you could come and meet live spiders in there. We also have a bug zoo that we call Bugtopia, and there's lots of different live bugs that live in there. And then we also have in our nature lab, we have some insects like an ant colony, and I included a photo of our beautiful queen. She's circled in that bottom right picture. Can we go to the next slide, please, Julie? So Why would we have live bugs at the museum? Well, we want visitors to learn about these bugs because they are very, very important animals. So in these pictures that I have here, you're going to see some different things that different types of bugs, mainly insects, are doing. And you might recognize it. If you look at it, you might see what's going on in these photos, right? So we see a bee on a flower. I bet some of you know what that bee is doing. That bee is pollinating the flower. So bees and other insects, even like flies and wasps, are very important pollinators. Then you see some beetles and they're rolling something around. It looks kind of gross, huh? It's a piece of poop. There are insects that feed on poop. And that's really important because we need bugs to help clean up all the stuff that gets left behind by other animals. If we didn't have bugs going out there and eating things like poop, the planet would get pretty gross, right? So they're part of the cleanup crew. There's a little insect on the right. That's actually one of the insects that we have here. That's a little hissing cockroach. And that little buddy's feeding on some leaves. So they're feeding on things on the forest floor. Again, big part of the cleanup crew. Very, very important. And then you see a picture of a little bird that just got itself a tasty snack. It's eating a butterfly. Insects are a major, major part of the food chain. So without insects, there are a lot of other animals that wouldn't have all that protein to eat. So that's another really important thing that insects do. And then the last picture, you see somebody holding a cute little ladybug in their hand. And I'm wondering if any of you have ever done this before. If you've ever picked up a little beetle and you looked at it like a little ladybug and you admired it and you said, "Whoa, this is really pretty. Look at these colors. I wonder what this beetle is thinking about." Maybe some of you have done this. So insects help us to connect to nature and they help us to ask questions about what some animals are up to, especially animals like insects that can be a little mysterious, right? Because they can't talk back to us and they can't tell us what they're thinking. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So that's what we're focusing on today. We're talking about how insects inspire us with their beauty and by being so different, so unique. You know, I think sometimes when we look at bugs and we get a little, maybe a little weirded out because they're so different, but I think that makes them more interesting or just very, very interesting than a lot of other animals. I have to confess, I'm a big fan of insects. I just think they're very interesting. So I selected some examples of ways that insects inspire us. We make a lot of jewelry that we model after insects' bodies and their colors and their interesting forms. There's even fancy designers that use insects as a reference for coats. Look at that really fancy coat there that's modeled after a Goliath beetle with all the beautiful patterns on its body. And then in the bottom right, you can see there's a lamp, a really beautiful stained glass lamp that's modeled after dragonflies. And then you see a picture of a person that is an artist, a street artist that's using spray paint. Can you imagine spray paint to make this incredible art? And he's really inspired by nature and he loves to paint insects and he makes the insects look like they're popping out of the wall. He's a really, really talented artist that is very inspired by the bodies of insects and the colors and the forms on insects. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Insects inspire a lot of other things too. They pop up in movies and video games and games like Pokemon and even in memes. So they inspire what we call pop culture as well. There's so many examples. It was really hard for me to pick just a few, but I put it out to my friends. I said, which examples should we pick? And everybody said, you got to do Pokemon. So we did Livani, and I hope I'm saying her name right. Livani is actually a type of ant, but I think she looks a bit like a stick bug that we're going to meet later on today because her body looks like it's made out of leaves. And so if she was in a forest, she would blend right in. She would be camouflaged, just like the stick bug that we're going to meet later. And we'll do one more slide before we meet our bugs, please. Thank you. Here's some other examples. And I'm wondering if any of you out there recognize these examples. Two of them are from movies. The one in the middle is a movie that I really, really like called Kubo and the Two Strings. And that type of beetle, he's a samurai that takes beetle form. That's called a stag beetle. And stag beetles have these really big mouth parts that they can open and close. So you could see that on his helmet. And on the left, another Pokemon. And that one is modeled after Hercules beetle. And Hercules beetles have big horns on their head. And then on the far right, what is Timon doing there? Why is he holding a big beetle grub? It's because he's hungry and he's going to eat it, right? So we talked about that already, how the insects are a big part of the food chain. And this is a great scene in Lion King where Timon is trying to get Simba to eat a beetle grub. And Simba's kind of like, oh, I don't know, guys. I guess I got to do it. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to switch to our camera, which is going to take a second, and we're going to meet some of the live bugs that we just talked about. I also have a lovely assistant with me today. His name is Eric, and he's going to be helping with moving some of the bugs around. All righty. And I'm going to share my screen. And if someone could let me know if we are now seeing a beetle.
That looks great, Lisa.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. Thanks, everyone, for being patient while we did the little switcheroo. But the first buddy that we're meeting today is a type of stag beetle. I want to see if we could see his face a little bit better. Now, I got to be careful because this stag beetle has, as I mentioned earlier, these big mouth parts that are called mandibles right up front. And if I'm not careful, he could give me a pinch. Did you see that right now? He said, hey, please don't put your hand so close to my face. And I will respect that. I will respect his wishes. I'm going to try to move the camera just a little bit so we can have a brighter light on him. See, maybe you could see some of the sections on his body. Is that a little better, I hope? Maybe so. I know he's kind of a dark beetle, but I want to point a few things out. Again, I got to be really careful here. But one of the ways that we know this is an insect is by counting the legs. That's always the first thing I do. If I look at something and I'm not quite sure what kind of bug it is, like, is it a spider? Is it a millipede? I'm not sure. I'm going to count the legs. So we could do that together. So we got 1, 2, 3 on this side. On the other side, which is a little hard to see, we have another 1, 2, 3. So we've got a total of 6 legs. So we know our little friend is an insect because all insects have 6 legs. I'm going to look close to his face. His face is over here. And I'm going to point out this little thing here. Do you see that? It's kind of moving. See that? Some of you might already know what this is. This is an antenna. And all insects have 2 antennae. We say antennae when we say 2 antennae. It's a little bit of Latin for you. So that's how we know that this is an insect, because all insects have that. Now, it's a little hard to see on this guy, but he also has 3 sections to his body. We'll look at that again on the other bugs. It'll be a little easier to see. This back part we call abdomen, thorax, and his head. Oh, his head's really easy to see because it's so big. A lot of times when people see stag beetles and they see those big mouth parts, they think that this beetle is a predator, that it uses those mouth parts to eat other animals, like other insects, but that's actually not the case. He's actually a vegetarian, and he really likes super soft, squishy fruit that falls down on the forest floor. Remember how we talked about that? A lot of insects help clean up the forest floor. So this beetle is part of the cleanup crew. He'll walk around and he might find something like a banana that's fallen to the ground and it's all squishy and there's little fruit flies on it. And he's like, all right, breakfast. We also give them this fun little beetle jelly that we buy. Can you see that there? He's like, oh, give me that, please. So we buy this little jelly for them. See what it looks like inside? It almost looks like Jell-O. And they love to eat this beetle jelly. So this is part of what we feed our beetles too. All right, we're going to do a quick little switch. We'll leave him here for a second. I'm going to get another really big beetle to share with all of you. Say bye to Mr. Stag Beetle. And we'll say hello to our Hercules beetle. Look at this guy. Does this guy remind you of that Pokemon that I showed you that had the big horn on the top of his head? It's inspired by this beetle right here, the Hercules beetle. I'm going to try to get the Hercules beetle on my hand so we can move him around a little bit more. But if he's not feeling it, then we'll say okay. But let's give it a shot. I don't know. He seems kind of grumpy about it. We'll try one more time. Hey, buddy, can I pick you up? Are you going to say no? He says no. He says no. So I have to be really careful while I'm picking him up because he's got claws on the end of his feet. And those claws are what help him to climb up trees in the forest so that he can be safe. But the little claws right now are really in the wood, and so that's why I'm trying to go really slow. I think we can keep him like this. So he's kind of on my hand, still being a little grumpy about it. That's okay, buddy. That's okay. We don't want him to be too stressed out, right? Sometimes these beetles are very mellow and they're okay with being touched, and other times they're saying, no, it's too early in the morning. I don't want to be touched. And so we respect that. I think we have a good view of them now. So we can look and see, because remember we were talking about how do we know if an insect is an insect? And one of the ways we do that is we can count legs. So we could see he's got 6 legs. We're trying to see his 3 body parts, but he's super feisty right now. This is like as feisty as I've ever seen him. What's going on, bud? What's going on? Maybe he can smell the beetle jelly and he's like, I just want to eat. You can turn him on his side so that way you can see his big horns. Okay, so just like I talked about with the stag beetle, he doesn't use those horns to catch other bugs. He actually uses the horns to fight with other male beetles. He likes to show off to the girl beetles and he'll get in these little battles. So that's what he's mainly using those horns for. So you can see this one here. This is the one that's actually attached to his head. And this one is more like a helmet that's on top. Boy, this guy is super feisty. I think we're going to give him a little break because he's just really kicking around right now. Okay, buddy, we'll give you a break. All right, so Eric's going to hold him for a second while I get, oh, that's actually a good spot right there that you can kind of see. Well, I grab something else, so hold on. All righty. Okay, I'm very, very excited to show you all this because this is something that most people who visit the museum don't get to see. This is what the Hercules beetle looks like as a baby or a beetle grub. So we talked a little bit about beetle grubs when I was talking about the Lion King, the scene where Timon was eating them, pulling them out from the tree trunk and eating them. This is what the beetle looks like before it turns into the adult beetle, and specifically the Hercules beetle, the one that we just saw. So this is a Hercules beetle larva or grub. Both of those words mean the same thing. Can you think of any other insects that start off looking like a worm-like creature? I bet a lot of you thought maybe about butterflies because that's a really, really famous example of a type of insect that goes through what we call metamorphosis, where they start off looking like a worm-like creature. And then as they get bigger, they look different, right? They get wings, their body looks really, really different. So this beetle grub, this Hercules beetle grub, in a few more months is going to start to transform and then eventually will turn into that big beetle that you just saw. This is about as big as the grub is going to get. It's its last stage. All right, let's go back to something we talked about earlier. How do we know that this is an insect and not a worm? Because it kind of looks like a worm, doesn't it? Like just a different shape, but very worm-like. Well, if we take a look down here, what do we see? We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legs. It's got 6 legs, so we know this is an insect and not a worm, because worms don't have any legs at all. We take a close look at its face, and you can see it's really, really tough, and it has these little mouth parts that can bite. So this type of insect is going to be eating things that it needs to break down with those mouth parts. It's eating dirt, it's eating pieces of wood that's starting to decay. So like a fallen tree or a log where the wood is still kind of soft. This little guy is going to nom, nom, nom on that all day long and spend his whole life or her life, I don't know if this one's a male or a female yet, underground. So going back to when we talked about how insects are very important, this insect is helping to recycle the soil. It's helping to break down things like rotting wood. and turn it into soil so that plants can grow. So it's very, very important as a decomposer or recycler. There's different words that we use to explain that process. It's a pretty big baby, right? Pretty amazing. And like I mentioned, most people don't get to see this because they live under the soil. And if we pull them out of the soil too often, it's stressful for them and it's unhealthy for them. So we only bring them out for very, very special occasions like today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my little beetle grub buddy back in the soil where they will be happy. And we're going to bring out our next live bug. So I'm going to wait a second. Eric's getting the next bug, and we'll do a little switcheroo. All right. So we're going to go ahead and just put this down here and see if she'll sit still. All the bugs are very worked up today. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's a little warmer back here, so they're all jazzed up today. Maybe they're just excited to meet y'all. Okay, so we just saw 3 beetles. We saw a stag beetle, a Hercules beetle, and then a Hercules beetle grub. But now we are looking at a very, very large walking stick. Believe it or not, I know it doesn't look very stick-like. There are some walking sticks that look more like a big branch or a leaf. I would say this one definitely looks like a bright green leaf. And this walking stick, I'm going to put her on my other hand and bring her back because she's on the move. This walking stick comes from a country in Asia called Malaysia. Malaysia is a tropical rainforest where there's lots of plant growth. So a lot of time the plants are bright green because of all the rain. The plants don't get dried out as often as they might in other areas with less rain. And so this big stick bug is going to be just sitting in the leaves all day, blending right in. And I bet a lot of you know the word for that, camouflaged. And she's just going to be eating the leaves. She's a vegetarian, just like those beetles we met. Just sitting there kind of minding her own business. Every so often you might see her kind of sway a little bit. So some of you might recognize that from some of the funny memes online about stick bugs, how they kind of sway back and forth and it almost looks like they're dancing. Well, that little swaying back and forth is part of what helps her to stay camouflaged because if she's sitting on a tree in some bushes and a little breeze comes by and all the branches sway, she's going to sway with the branches too. So the reason why I know this one is a female, I don't know if you noticed, I kept saying she. The females look, whoop, let me bring her back. My goodness, she's getting her workout. She's on a treadmill right now. The females are the ones that are a lot bigger than the males, and they have this little structure at the back. Okay, we got a good opportunity to see it. Do you see right here what I'm pointing at? So sometimes people look at that little structure and they think that it's a stinger, but it's actually what she uses to lay eggs because all insects come from eggs. All insects make eggs. So that little structure back there, she could actually take it and put it, she won't stop moving. She'll put it in the dirt and she can put a little egg right in the dirt. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set her aside. I've got another stick bug that we're going to pull out. And I think this other one is going to sit more still. Boy, do I hope, because all these buddies are just really, I think I just picked the most hyper bugs today. All right, let's let her walk back on here. There we go. And then I'm going to hand her over to Eric. Thank you, Eric. Oh, now she's walking up my arm. Stick bug bloopers. There we go. All right, so this one here, take a look on this stick, and you could see that she definitely matches the little stick that she's on. I'm going to try to very carefully just kind of have her go on the other side so we can see her. So this is a type of stick bug that comes from Australia. It comes from an area where the leaves dry out a little bit more. It gets really hot and there's still rain, but there's periods of less rain where the leaves and the plants get a little bit drier. And so it makes sense that this stick bug, rather than looking like a really juicy green leaf with lots of water, looks more like a dried out leaf. Just like the other stick bug we met, like all stick bugs, she's also a vegetarian or herbivore. So she's only feeding on plants. She'll just sit in the leaves, eating the leaves, and hoping to stay camouflaged or blended in because there's lots of other animals out there, other insects, spiders, birds, lizards, you name it, that are wandering around looking for a little high protein snack. And this stick bug would be a healthy meal for another animal. So staying camouflaged is incredibly, incredibly important. Let me get her on my hand and I'm going to see if she'll do the little sway. Australian stick bugs have a tendency to do that little back and forth sway that we were just talking about. Oh, she's doing it. See how she's kind of moving back and forth? Now I'm going to see if I just blow on her a little bit, add a little wind. Let's see if she does it. Yep, yep. She did it a little bit more and now she's walking. You see that? So imagine how long it would take her to get from one side of the forest to the other, because this is about top speed for this stick bug. The other stick bug we saw was really kind of walking quickly, but most stick bugs, they sway back and forth a little bit, then take a step forward, sway back and forth a little bit, then take a step forward. So it's really, really hard for them to get from one place to the other. Some of these stick bugs, not this one, but some of them do have wings and can fly. And I've heard that a lot of these stick bugs with wings are inspiration for things like fairies. Fairies really are inspired by insects, actually. That's a whole other thing that we could have talked about today. All right, I'm going to hold her on her side so we could kind of get a good view of her in profile. And this is actually a really good opportunity to see these up here, right? We've been talking about this, like how do we know if it's an insect or not? Well, she's got two antennae and she's got one, oh, hi, two, three, four, five, six. She's got 6 legs. And she's got 3 body parts. She's got the head here, the middle section, and the back section. So we know for sure that we have an insect in our hand. They make it fairly easy for us to be able to tell. So Julie, do we have time for another live bug, or is there one that we saw earlier that we might want to bring back?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did get a lot of questions about the Hercules beetle, but happy to jump into some of these Q&A and maybe we can bring them back as we chat. But I know you mentioned they were a little squirrely, so that is optional. But we can also do one last friend before we jump into questions too.
Yeah, we have a little, we have an Atlas beetle that maybe Eric can go grab really quick.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we're definitely getting a lot of beetle questions. They
Yeah.
are so amazing. So
Yeah,
I'm excited to dive into some of these. So we'll look at our last friend and then we'll jump into some of these.
that sounds good. And just like I was mentioning with the Hercules beetle larva, that a lot of visitors don't get to see that, but even our large Hercules beetle, he comes out for presentations from time to time, but he's not on display. So that's another one that's a very special insect for people to see. But Eric's gonna see if we can find our little Atlas beetle. He likes to burrow under the soil, so he's looking for him right now. But I'm glad this little Australian walking stick was a bit calmer than some of the other bugs that we had. And oh, here he is. Okay, we'll do a little trade-off here. I wanted to bring this buddy out because he's got such a beautiful color on him. He's almost like a metallic green color. And so color is another, I think, interesting thing to look at when you are learning about bugs, because you can see colors on insects that you really can't see on a lot of other animals. And the main reason for that is because of their outside skeleton, which we call an exoskeleton. So insects are the opposite of us. We have our bones on the inside and then all of our softer tissues on the outside of our bones, right? So like when we're touching ourselves, it's, we feel the skin and we feel kind of soft. But with insects, it's the other way around. When you touch an insect, they feel very tough because you're actually feeling their version of bones on the outside. And having that hard structure on the outside helps keep them safe because it is like a little armor, kind of going back to the beetle that was a samurai and his armor looked like it was a beetle costume. I mean, that's a really, I think, such a great comparison because their exoskeletons are almost like armor, right? But it also allows them to have lots of shininess to their exoskeletons. And it's really just the way light is bouncing off of that outside shell. So this little guy is a great example of a beetle that's super shiny. I mean, you can see all the light shining off of him because we've got some special lights on him and he's just glowing. And I move it a little bit and it even changes color. You can see it kind of creates different shades of green on his exoskeleton. This guy, by the way, is named Pumbaa. So Lion King fans back here. Well, what do you think? Should we answer some questions? I'm really curious to know. I've been seeing the chat. I'm not looking at the chat, but I can see that there's lots of activity going on, and I would love to get some questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. Before we get into some of those really great beetle questions, someone did notice your background. It's your actual background and where you are. So could you talk about a little bit more about the space that you're in, Lisa? Are you at the museum right now?
I am at the museum right now. So we have a team of 7 people, and we're here every day, even on holidays, even on Christmas and Thanksgiving. We come in to take care of the animals that live here. And we have areas in the museum where the live animals live that visitors can see. But we also have a behind the scenes area. So it's closed to the public. It's only for staff. And that's the area that I'm in right now. This room is called an insectary. And it's where we do a lot of our care for the bugs that live here. So some bugs, they'll spend some time on display and then they get a little break, or maybe they're getting a little older and we want to give them a quiet, peaceful retirement, and they will live in this room. Some of the bugs that live here, we raise them here, meaning they're here having babies and we take care of the babies and raise them to adults. And so we would do that in this room where we could be very careful and very safe with the animals that live here with the babies. And this is also the area where before the butterflies go out to the butterfly pavilion, where we are able to put the butterflies in special containers and take them out. That's a whole process we could talk about later.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. And special shout out to Eric, right, who's behind the scenes helping you right now. So thank you so much for helping us. If you want, yes. Um, but yeah, we had so many questions about the Hercules beetle. I think Callie wanted to know if they had a name. And I think a lot of folks were wondering about like the names of each one. I know you mentioned this one, but if they each have names, maybe you can let us know what their names are.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I forgot to say that. How rude of me. Hercules beetle's name is Humberto. And our stag beetle, is that Gomez? How can I be forgetting? Because I'm on the spot. Yeah, I think that one's Gomez. So we have a lot of bugs. They do get names, but some of them, like the stick bugs, we have hundreds of them. So we don't always give them individual names, but all of our tarantulas, all of our large beetles, and I think a lot of other stuff we have, they get their own individual names.
Very cool. So cute. I love hearing all their names. Big shout out to them for being with us on the program today. We had another question about their metamorphosis. I think they were talking about Hercules. You showed us that big grub. So how long is their metamorphosis process? Like that grub looked huge to us. How long does it take them to get to a full grown beetle?
That's a great question. So it's a pretty long process for the Hercules beetle. The larval stage, that stage that you saw, they're in that stage for almost 2 years, about a year and a half to 2 years. And it varies because it can change depending on temperature and how much they're eating, how healthy they are. So it can be a little slower if they don't have as much food, or if it gets a little cold, that'll slow them down. But once they come out of the egg, they look much, much smaller. And then it takes about a year and a half for them to get to the size of the one that you saw. Then there's a stage in between we call the pupal stage, and they'll be in that stage for a few months or so before they become an adult. So the whole cycle from egg to adult is about 2 years. It's a pretty long time. And
Wow, yeah.
compare that to something like a butterfly that'll go through metamorphosis in just a few weeks. So it's, yeah, most insects go through that whole cycle much more quickly, but these Hercules beetles and these other really large beetles, it takes a long time.
Awesome. And I will pull, how old is, I think Callie is also wondering, how old is the Hercules beetle that we have?
The Hercules beetle that I just showed everybody right now, we think he's about 3 months old. We don't know for sure because when we received him, we don't know exactly how old he was. So our best guess is about 3, maybe 4 months. And they actually only live for about 6, 7 months. They have a pretty short life once they're adults. Now remember, they were alive before in the grub stage. But once they're adults, it's fairly short. And most of the time, once they're adults, they're just interested in finding a mate or a partner. So they put a lot of work into doing that. But then they also spend a lot of time just kind of hanging out and eating rotting fruit. They love soft fruit.
That sounds relaxing. Let's see. I think more folks were curious about their little faces. They noticed those big horns, and I think you kind of had some like really great angles of like their mandibles and stuff. So we're really curious. I think Ashen was wondering if there's any beetles that have a deadly bite, or do some of I think someone else, let me find it. I think Jocelyn was wondering if they bite. Do you ever have to be concerned about that, Lisa?
Yeah, the stag beetle, the first one that we showed everybody, that's the one that has a pretty strong pinch, which you could say is very similar to a bite. It's not anything that would make you bleed, but if it hung onto your finger for a long time, it could maybe bruise and it would not feel good. They're pretty strong. And it really is just the beetle letting you know that it's scared and it's telling you, please leave me alone, right? That's how a lot of animals communicate. They have to communicate with their bodies because they can't talk in the same way we can. So that's the beetle that we have to be the most cautious with, careful with. These other beetles, the horns on their head are really more like ornamentation, that they could use to kind of get in fights. Like you think about like deer or a moose, like when they fight with their antlers. It could kind of, you can feel it on your skin. It doesn't feel pleasant, but it's not like a really strong bite. In terms of any beetles being deadly, they don't have any venom, so if they're biting you, pinching you, it's just the force of their mouth parts. They're not injecting anything into you. So they're not considered deadly animals. It would just be more startling, especially for some of these bigger ones where their mouth parts are really strong.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Alrighty. I know we had lots of questions about the beetles, but I'm gonna give our walking bugs six some love too, because we did have questions about them too. So Elodie was wondering, where can you find them? Where can you find walking sticks? Do we have them around here?
We do. We do have walking sticks that live in Los Angeles. Not a lot of them in the city. Usually kind of have to go to more natural areas or even going out towards the deserts to find them. But because their camouflage is so great, a lot of times people don't even see them. They just walk on by. So the handful of times that I've seen them in this area, not the walking sticks at the museum, but out in nature, is because one was walking on a wall and it allowed it to stand out. But I'm sure I've walked by many walking sticks without noticing them. Now, the walking sticks that live here in Southern California look more like a little thin twig. So they look more like kind of the traditional idea of a walking stick. They don't look like big and leafy, or they're definitely not as big as the two walking sticks that you got to meet earlier.
Okay, awesome. They are very beautiful, so I'm glad we got to see some of those really special ones too. And You mentioned how great their camouflage was. Brooke was wondering, do the stick bugs ever get confused and eat another stick bug? Um, or yeah, like, is it hard for them to notice each other?
That is a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. And yes, they do get confused and sometimes chew on each other. So we have to be careful, make sure there's enough plants in there. I think that happens more often. If there's too many in their home and there's not enough food for them, they kind of get a little desperate and they'll start to chew on each other's wings. So that's what I've seen them do. Now, I think it's just because they're really hungry. They're going to prefer to eat the plants because the plants, this is really good. They're using their eyesight, but they're also using smell to know it's the right thing to eat. And it probably feels a little different too to them, right? So if they accidentally start chomping on their friend and chomping on the wings, it probably is like something's not right about this. But we have observed that before where they'll start kind of just nibbling on each other's wings. But I've never seen one like fully eat the other one. And they're not predators. At some point, I think they would realize this is weird, this is different, this is not right.
This is my friend. Whoopsies. Okay, great. That actually, sticking on the same theme as camouflage and how they're so great on it, with it. Nadia was wondering, can stick bugs change color to camouflage themselves? Do they stay one color or can they change it up?
There are some stick bugs that change color as they get bigger. So as they're growing, they have to shed their old exoskeleton. Oh my gosh, I can show you what that looks like really quick. I don't know. Can you, are we still seeing the camera
Yeah.
too? Just me. Okay, cool. So I'm going to move little beetle away and I'm going to show you what the stick bug that we saw earlier. This is what it looks like when they shed their exoskeleton. We call this a molt. So any animal that has an exoskeleton, insect, spider, a lobster, a shrimp, millipede, they all have to do this. So with some of these stick bugs, when they're smaller, they might look like one color, and then as they get bigger, they'll turn into a different color. So they do have the ability to change colors, but it's not the way it is with like a chameleon. That's a classic example of an animal that can immediately change color. Like it could just move and change color. There's some octopuses that can do that too, right? Just immediately change color. And with insects, that's not how it works. It's mostly as they're getting bigger, as they're molting, getting rid of their old exoskeleton, they'll change color and sometimes even look pretty different too. I mean, well, we observe that with the beetle, right? You can drastically change. And there are also some insects that when their exoskeletons get wet and they retain moisture, they darken up a little bit. So that also would make them change color. But yeah, but it's not the same as it is with something like a chameleon where it's a very quick change of color.
All righty. I think we're going to do one more question so I can close us out. But friends, we encourage you to write down your questions and do your own research if we didn't get to yours today. But Lisa, I know we had a question about your favorite insect, or maybe one that we didn't see today, behind the scenes. Do you have a favorite in your collection, back there?
Oh, a favorite in the collection. Okay, that's different than favorite. Let's see. Oh, I don't know. I feel like I can't say which one's my favorite because if the other one's here, their feelings are going to get hurt. I really do love all the little animals that I take care of. We have one tarantula that I just particularly am very amused by because every time we feed her, she's very dramatic and she's just really funny. She just makes me laugh. I don't think she knows she's being funny, but she's funny to me. Her name is Holly and she's got little white stripes on her legs. So she's one of my favorites, but but I love them all equally. I do wish that we could display some insects that fly a lot. I mean, we do with butterflies, but there are a lot of other insects that I find really interesting, like different types of wasps and flies. I feel like they don't get a lot of the credit that some of the other insects get, but those are hard insects for us to bring out for presentations because they would fly away. So those are certain groups of insects that I would love to show off more, but it's just tricky because they fly and some of them sting. That makes it tricky too.
That is so fair. Alrighty. I want to thank you and the team behind the scenes there, so much for bringing out all of your friends today. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we will see you again soon shortly. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, to all the kids out there. Thank you for being kind and curious with insects.
Alrighty. And then I'm just gonna close us out with one more thing, friends. If any of our insects or you have a special favorite insect that inspires you, we would love to see your insect inspired or bug inspired art. So if you'd like to draw your favorite and email them to the school programs team, or maybe you can as a class, you can send them over. And our email is schoolprograms@nhm.org. Just let us know what school, what grade, and attach those images into the email, and we'll be sharing them in our next webinar program and on our virtual programs webpage. I think that is it for our program this morning. Thank you all so much for joining us. Here's just where you can rewatch this if you want to go ahead and look at those beetles and stick bugs again, and see more live animals on our Live Animals Instagram page. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Take care and be safe.